Ralston College is a revival and reinvention of the traditional university and is dedicated to honest and intense study of the humanities. Admissions are now open for its MA in the Humanities in 2024-25. The first term is based in Greece, where students learn ancient Greek and modern Greek immersively, reading Homer, Plato, John's Gospel, and Cavafy. The following 3 terms are located in the beautiful and historic city of Savannah, Georgia. United by the theme of nature, the great cultural achievements of the Western tradition, and the most profound and enduring questions of the human condition will be studied through the arc of 3 millennia. 35 places are available for MA students, and all successful applicants will be automatically considered for full scholarships. Please visit ralston.ac for further details. Ralston offers fellowship for anyone, anywhere who wishes to seek the truth with courage. Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Saad Truth. Today I have a repeat guest. Not too many people are courageous enough to come for a second round. Abigail Shrier, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I went back to look at the inventory, my backlog of shows, and you came on the first time in October 2021 in the midst of the pandemic when this beauty we discussed this beauty for which you won. Let me just put on my glasses. The Barbara Olson Award for Excellence and Independence in Journalism in 2021. It was named a best book by The Economist and The Times, and it has been translated in 10 languages. But today we're here to discuss your latest one, which is also doing incredibly well. This guy right here, Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. So I thought maybe the first place we can start, give us just a quick synopsis of what the book is about, and then we can drill down.
Sure. Bad therapy. I start every book with a question. And in bad therapy, I asked, why is the rising generation, Gen Z, that received the most mental health interventions, the most mindfulness, the most wellness tips, the most psych meds, the most therapy? Why were they in the greatest despair? They should be the picture of wellness. We've done nothing but work on their wellness, and yet they seem to have very poor mental health. And the other question I asked was, why did they seem to have no interest in growing up?
And okay, so I'm assuming that it stems from the I'm okay, you're okay, tell me about your feelings, the coddling stuff that, many of us have been pointed to. Is that the general reason why we're in this quagmire?
I think it sort of relates back to the parasitic mind, what the points you made there, which is that we have this mind virus about trauma. We have this mind virus about mental health, and the mind virus is that all of us are traumatized, or we're very easily traumatized. Our mental health is extraordinarily fragile. Anything can upset the apple cart, and we're all basically one bad episode away from being schizophrenic, screaming at phantoms in the street. And it's not true. It's never been true. We're actually built for resilience. We're built to overcome adversity. But the story that gets told over and over, especially to children and their parents, is that any bad things that happens to a child, any difficult thing, can traumatize you for life.
I mean, thank you for mentioning the parasitic mind, because in there I borrow Descartes' I think, therefore I am. I change it to I'm a victim, therefore I am, right? So the way that I ascend the social hierarchy in today's social capital currency is I have to be a victim. And if I'm not a victim, say Jussie Smollett, then I will manufacture a victimhood story, because there is no way for me to truly garner what I need if I'm not a victim. So I get that. Now, just the previous guest on my show, I'm not sure if you know him. Do you know who Rob Henderson is?
Yeah, sure. He's
Right.
wonderful.
So, right. He's lovely. He's fantastic. I just posted a few days ago our chat, and of course, it's going to relate to your book in the sense that there are people who actually, to your point, do go through trauma. I mean, my childhood in Lebanon was not a very pleasant one. Uh, him going through, many foster care families was a very difficult upbringing. Yeonmi Park didn't go through, and yet, to your point, I always say, notwithstanding the difficulties I faced in my childhood, that made me exactly, I love the word, I know it's overused sometimes, more resilient, right?
Right.
Facing those stressors allows me to not only overcome things today, but it allows me to contextualize some of the things that I might be whining about today in lieu of what I faced in my childhood. Because, oh, I'm feeling stressed because I've got to do X, Y, Z. And then I stop for a second and I say, you miraculously escaped Lebanon. Stop whining. This is my inner voice saying this. So maybe talk a bit more about that, the stressors that
Right.
are important.
I mean, that's exactly right. So many people who had difficult childhoods will say, I overcame it and it's part of why I'm so tough today, or in some ways it made me stronger. And it's something we instinctively know. It's something that the research bears out. Even combat veterans, most of them will not get PTSD, even if they've seen horrible, horrible things. The vast majority do not develop PTSD because we're actually built for resilience. But when you tell kids the opposite, when you tell young people that if their parents yelled at them or failed to ask them what was wrong, that they could forever be, or were picked on or called a bad name in middle school, that their bodies hold on to this trauma forever. First of all, it isn't true, but it's really likely to do more damage than leaving them alone. And that's what we're doing. We're telling kids constantly that they're victims, as you just said, and it gives them social capital to be a victim. The problem is it becomes a very limiting factor in life. These kids are afraid to grow up. They're afraid to do things like driving. 17-year-old boys say that driving is scary and they put off getting their licenses.
Wow. I mean, if you go back to psychoanalysis, I mean, while it may not have been rooted in a ethos of victimhood, the argument that whether mommy hugged me enough or didn't hug me enough could cause schizophrenia. I mean, that used to literally be called a schizophrenic mother, right? Now we know that schizophrenia is if there's ever an organic disease, it's completely an organic disease that is completely unrelated to any nurture mechanisms, right? I mean, you could take a pill, there's a pharmacological intervention, and now you no longer hear those nasty voices in your head. You get off the meds, and then you go back to being quite, oftentimes paranoid, schizophrenic. So all that's happened is that instead of, in the say Freudian sense, rooting it to some repressed sexual thing, the same thing is happening now, except that we are now anchoring it in victimhood. Mommy didn't give me a Big Mac, therefore that's why I'm not successful today.
That's right. And there was a new study out by this amazing researcher named Kathy Wydum, who's really just a brilliant researcher. I don't know anything, I don't know her personally, but just brilliant researcher. And she just came out with this new piece. She follows kids who had traumatic experiences. And unlike a lot of researchers, she actually does it correctly. She does it prospectively. So she looks forward. So she documents the trauma, the traumatic experience to make sure it actually happened. And then she checks in with them again, or has researchers who don't know if they're dealing with the control group or the kids with traumatic experience, check in with them again as adults. And what she found was that these kids who as adults had turned the traumatic experience into a central part in their narrative, they suffered in adulthood. But the ones who went through the same sorts of experiences in adulthood, who decided they weren't a big deal, their childhood negative experiences weren't a big deal and didn't make it part of their narrative, they actually were flourishing. So it really matters when we tell someone that they're going to be forever imprinted with trauma, because if they turn their lives, if they orient their entire lives around this victim story of trauma, they're much more likely to suffer in adulthood.
Well, and I want to link all that you just said to, not only my personal narrative, let's also look at that of my wife. So my wife's family escaped, grandparents escaped the Armenian genocide. They then, right? I mean, they're escaping being executed. Then they move to Lebanon. My wife's parents are born in Lebanon. Then they have to leave Lebanon because of the Lebanese civil war. Now let's look at my family. So of course we escaped. We went through about as rough and a harrowing experience as one can go through in the Lebanese civil war as Lebanese Jews. Some of my immediate ancestors prior to my parents escaped from Syria. They're Syrian Jews. My brother-in-law's family is from Egypt. They're Alexandrian Jews. They had to leave there. So this is not, I'm going back to 300 years ago, where there was slavery, or in the context of Canada, there were some indigenous issues that happened in 1656. This is within my lifetime, and yet we define ourselves in the fact that we've overcome all those difficulties, and look at us now, we're successful. Whereas other cultures say, no, 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 I can't succeed because something happened to people 300 years ago that have absolutely no link to me. It's not a recipe for success.
That's right. And it builds into, I mean, that's where the wokeism sort of comes in, because of course, now you're currently experiencing the harms of slavery. If you have intergenerational
That's right.
trauma, about which I'm highly suspicious because there really isn't much evidence for it. But but if you have intergenerational trauma, you've been in slavery now,
Right.
right? The effects are lingering. So it's very convenient. There's really not good evidence for it. And of course, the evidence that we do have for epigenetic changes tend to be adaptive. They tend to help the cells or the next generation survive. So the idea that there's this debilitating thing that gets passed on, your trauma, and it harms the survivor, making it worse for you in the future. It's just not what the story of evolution has, led us to believe, or what we would expect. And there's just not a lot of good evidence for it. But the idea is absolutely harmful.
Yeah, I'm so
People,
glad that you mentioned epigenetics, because as you were saying that, that's exactly what I thought of. Uh, okay, but so just to be fair to therapy,
yeah.
you're not, uh, throwing eggs in all contexts. Yeah, because I watched your brief appearance. I think it was maybe 10, 11 minutes long, with Ben Shapiro,
Okay.
whom I love and so on. And it's great. I mean, you're great. But it was like, talk therapy bullshit. But we do know, for example, that, and he was right when he said that cognitive behavior therapy is the intervention strategy that has been most scientifically validated. But just the mere fact of my having a supportive wife or a really trustworthy friend that I can go to and unload on some ruminative thinking that I'm engaged in, that is very important, and it is psychologically very satisfying. So you're not egging all talk therapy.
No, and let me just say, of course, those things are essential. Don't we all need them? And let me just say, I'm not even against therapy. I think therapy can be wonderful. The question is two things. One, do you actually need it? And when I say, do you need it, I'm talking about children. Adults can go for any reason they want. And I think that's great. Adults, if they feel that they're going to get something out of it, or they want it, by all means, do it. And you might be helped. The point of my book is just to say the whole project is very different with a child, because the child is not signing up to do the hard work of therapy. They're being strong armed by an adult. No one is tracking side effects, and therapy can introduce harms. And we know this. There's a whole body of research on the harms of therapy. But with a child can't say, or a teenager is not going to say to a therapist, listen, I know my mom shouldn't have said that, but I don't think I'd call her emotionally abusive. It's
Right.
very hard for a child to say that. And also, listen, I don't seem to be getting better. We keep focusing on my social phobia, and nothing's improved. A child doesn't have the background, but an adult can say, listen, I've been coming to you for 2 years. My depression's as bad as it was. I don't think this is helping.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I see it not just, I mean, as a professor, I deal with students, but who are obviously older than the demographic that you're typically talking about. But I've noticed, I mean, it's anecdotal in that I haven't done the actual statistical analysis, but the data is so clear. If I look at, so this is, I'm entering now, I'm finishing my 30th year as a professor. I'm almost 30. I can't
Wow.
believe it's 31 years.
Wow, you look great.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
I would not have guessed 30
Thank you.
years. Wow.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed that the first, let's go with 20 some years, 20, 21, 23 years. I almost never had a student who had registered with, I don't remember the exact name of the office, but like the Office of Disabilities or
Right.
something, for special dispensations. I need 75% more time for my exam. I need this, I need that. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, it would not be, I'm not being hyperbolic, probably 10% of the students have some disability that they
Right.
register with. So we went from, so in any given semester, I now have more students that are registered with that office than I had in totality the first
Right.
20 some years. That's basically your book right there.
That's right. That's exactly right. We have convinced a generation it is unwell. We've told them to get into wheelchairs and their legs are atrophying. That's one way of looking at it. Emotionally, they have no musculature because we made excuses for everything. Now, when I say that they've avoided everything hard. Now, I'm not saying that there's no child who deserves a, academic dispensation. There is a time and place for it. But the question is, do they really need it? And it is being given out to everyone
Yeah, like
so casually.
I,
Yeah,
I have, I get stressed
right,
before an exam. So I have anxiety based
right.
exam taking. Yeah,
That's
it's called life. I
right.
mean, I spent a decade in university, and even though I was a very good student, there is an exam that I think, oh boy, this might be a tough one. My heart is beating. That doesn't make me clinically anxious. It makes me a human being.
Right, exactly. But if you got to avoid those tests or double the time and constantly get extensions for them, then your anxiety would get worse
Yeah,
and your
exactly.
ability to handle life would get worse. And that's what we're seeing. These kids can't cope because we've never let them try. We've never made them try.
So in your first book, you're also I mean, the transgender thing can apply to adults, but of course there's a focus on children, and
Yeah.
the ethics of putting someone on puberty blockers and scarring them and so on. So in both of the books there is sort of an attempt to try to protect our children. What drives that quest in your case? Is it, I am a mom. I have young, kid. I don't know how old they are, but I'm assuming they're not. Are they adults?
No, they're
No.
kids. Yeah,
Okay,
young
they're
kids.
kids. So was that the original sort of launching pad that caused you to write these two books, and that you can empathize, given that you have your own young children?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a mom. The first book, I didn't know any, it wasn't personal to me. Moms wrote to me, but I was really intrigued, but I was also noticing that no one else wanted to take it up. I gave my sources to other investigative journalists and they didn't want to do it. Originally, I hadn't done serious investigative journalism. So I tried to give it to someone with more experience and no one wanted to touch it. And that's when I finally said, all right, this isn't rocket science. Let me give it a shot. And so that's how I ended up telling their story. But the second story, this one's a little more personal because I see the incredible amount of diagnosis. I mean, diagnosis in numbers that don't make any sense. You talk to parents today and they will say, you'll ask them, do you have ADHD? No. Does your wife have ADHD? No. Did your parents have ADHD? No. Well, then why do both of your kids have a diagnosis? Isn't that straight, surprising? It's not easy to say all this to someone because you don't want to hurt their feelings. But what they'll say is, oh, I had undiagnosed ADHD.
Right.
I'm so glad we got it diagnosed. Well, now you have a 5-year-old on a stimulant who's not learning to cope, right? And I'm not saying that's never appropriate to put a child if you've tried other things. But very often they don't, these are the same parents who unfortunately don't set any guardrails for their kids. And in general, we haven't given kids a very healthy life in lots and lots of ways, including the tech saturation. And then they can't sit still and we pour in mental health resources and it isn't helping.
So what is, and whenever one writes these genres of book, you diagnose the malady, but then you have to offer,
Cure,
in my
yeah.
case, the mind vaccine, in your case, whatever set of solution. Is it just, let's stop with the faux empathy, let's stop with the over prescription of therapy, let's be more directed parents? Is that the general story?
Yeah, it's a few things. We need authority. Parents need to assert their authority with their children, which doesn't mean being cold and unloving. It just means mom and dad or the parents are in charge, not some expert. The kids need to know that ultimately the parents know what's best and are in charge. Parents aren't giving that message because they're so undercut. They have no confidence. But they need to know a few things. First of all, the child needs to know they're going to be fine. In most cases where they have been hurt or left out or scared or frightened, we need to stop affirming their fears and
Right.
instead tell them, you're going to be fine. Keep playing. You're doing great. Keep going. And we're telling them the opposite right now, but that's what we need to tell them. We need to surround them with extended family, people who actually really love them and care and give them a sense. You talked about your family stories. You obviously draw a lot of strength from what your family went through. People aren't telling their kids what their families survived. That's a child's only proof that they come from tough stock.
Right.
You got to tell them that. Tell them because they will go through hard times. You can't stop that from happening, but you can steel them to it a little. And you have to give them independence, real independence. Not do you want to dye your hair purple or green, but actual independence. Walk home from school, walk around the neighborhood, get to know, their surroundings, go do chores for the family, go to the store for the family. I mean, you have to let them develop capacity in their world or they'll always be frightened of it.
Do you, so you know the old expression, physicians can't heal thyself and so on. So
Yeah.
as you, enunciate some of these parental prescriptions, have you found that you often yourself in your own parental responsibilities violate these, where you say, oh, geez, I just violated page 173 in my book because I think, over coddling kid number two?
Sure, I did lots of these things before I started writing the book, but so I'll give you an example. My daughter, who was 9 at the time, wanted to walk home from the bus stop, and she was so little, but she really wanted to walk home by herself. It was only a few blocks, and I didn't want to let her. The cars are so big, and she was so little. And but one of the things, and I used to just think about all those dangers, all the bad things that could happen to her. But what I started realizing while I was researching this book was actually there's a whole other set of dangers that I wasn't paying attention to. And that's the dangers that come when you never let your child grow up and develop
Right,
capacity. So I was talking to parents who had 12-year-olds, they couldn't get out of the house. They
right.
couldn't dislodge them from the couch. And I started realizing, okay, there are dangers to letting her walk home, but there are also dangers to not letting her. She won't know how to handle herself. And this wonderful woman I interviewed, who's the head of the emotions lab at Georgetown University, she's an academic psychologist, Yulia Chensova Dutton. She does cross-cultural studies in emotional regulation. And she told me that she noticed that university students from America are now exaggerating dangers so much in their minds compared to other students. So they'll say things like, if you ask them what was a dangerous experience you've had, they'll say things like a stranger looking at me funny
Right.
or a scary Uber driver, things that aren't actually that scary. But these kids have been sheltered emotionally. They're so underdeveloped that they have no strength to confront even normal challenges.
Very interesting. Well, let me ask. So I'm going to share with you one parental edict that I have abided by for my children. And you might either say, oh, that was a good decision, or I was succumbing to some of the things that you're talking about.
Okay.
So I have a rule that everyone is a pedophile as the starting point, meaning that I'm never going to put my children in a position where someone could take advantage of them, right? There are
Okay.
no sleepovers, right? So, can I go to so and so's house? My first question is there a male? Yes, answer is no. Because you don't there aren't horns that are growing on the person who can abuse your children, right? And that we often hear, oh, but our neighbor seemed like such a sweet guy. Look at John Gacy. He used to have do the clown shows for the kids. He's such a lovely guy. He's so effusive and lovely and jovial and jocular. And so I've always had a rule: that never, ever, ever, I mean, now they're a bit older, but never would my children sleep at someone's house. Someone wants to come to our house, that's fine. But no, what do you think of that? Was I too much succumbing to the precautionary? Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't have a social life, just they can't go away on a camping trip with some, two adults. What do you think?
That's a good question. I'll tell you, I don't do sleepovers either, and my kids haven't pushed for it so much, but I'll tell you why. You know who gave me the confidence to say no to sleepovers? It was Amy Chua, my wonderful friend and mentor.
Yes.
Yeah, Amy Chua in her book, and she basically said the kids get no sleep, they're up all night, they come home a mess, and I just didn't think that was a great thing to do for a weekend, was now deal with a kid who's a complete mess on a Sunday because he or she was up all night. Now, the flip side to all that is I definitely send my kids to sleepaway camp every summer.
Okay.
And I got a lot more confidence doing that when I was researching the book. And part of the reason is that it's a no tech. They don't allow phones at the camp, but it is people who generally, share our values, and it's a religious Jewish camp. And at some point, I do think you have to develop your kids' musculature to saying, to notice, to trusting themselves when someone seems a little off to them,
Right.
to not letting themselves in a bad situation. And at some point you got to let them sort of stand up for themselves, because I think, general, they can do it.
Got you. Okay, so we're gonna move on to some other topics, but just to remind
Okay.
people, bad therapy, go and get it, people. All right, let's talk about some of the things that I think are keeping us both up at night. We briefly touched upon it offline before we began our chat. What the hell is going on since October 7th, Abigail?
It's really scary. I mean, I think it was really shock. I think it shocked sort of Jews worldwide, maybe, many Christians as well. But I think for, certainly in America, in some ways, I think our big wake up call came after, when we saw the cheering in our streets and on university campuses, the reaction by administrations, the disinclination even to do anything to keep Jews safe on campus. It really, if this wasn't a wake up call, I don't know what was, to the fact that, uh, there are new dangers, I think, to Jews, and certainly in America. I don't live in Canada, but I gather Canada as well.
Oh yeah. Well, look, I hate to be the one who keeps telling people I told you so, but I told you so because I've been warning about this for well over 2 decades. Because the old maxim, demography is destiny,
That's right.
exists for a reason, right? I mean, the reason why the ancient Greek maxim, know thyself, has existed for millennia is because it's a very profound and powerful and accurate maxim. So, demography is destiny is basically saying that, you don't have to be a fancy professor to understand that if you're going to have an infusion of people who come from cultures where when you do Pew, so Pew is a nonpartisan global survey company, where you do Pew surveys and the people coming from those cultures exhibit Jew hatred in the order of 95 to 99% of the people polled, right? So, again, for those of us who are not processing what that means, I sample 1,000 people, 990 exhibit Jew hatred. So if you now let in 100,000 of those folks in the country, notwithstanding, so let me do the bullshit kumbaya thing. Not all people are evil and mean and so on. And I too know lovely Muslim people who don't hate Jews, who are my friends, but it's a statistical game. So is there going to be an increase in Jew hatred? No change in Jew hatred, or a decrease in Jew hatred? Well, obviously, you're going to have an increase in Jew hatred if you allow people to enter who come from such societies. So what you're seeing on campuses in the streets is simply the fact that we've reached a tipping point in our demographic reality. And it is only going to get worse. There is no alternative. So, for example, if I tell you right now, I plan on not exercising and eating 3 pounds of French fries a day, can I predict what will happen to my weight? There is no alternative. I will put on weight. And so, having set up this whole long winded rant, do you see us ever having, in the West, us meaning the West, having a new look at immigration strategies that could reverse this, or are we doomed to a slow death?
Gosh, I don't think I'm terribly politically astute. So I don't know the politics of what, whether, there's the will to change immigration. But I have to tell you, I was never someone who took seriously immigration policy. I generally thought immigrants were a great thing to America and very positive, and still feel very warmly in general about immigration. But seeing people cheer on the mass murder of Jewish civilians, the decapitation, the rape of women, and cheer that in American streets, and then have places like the university administrators defend it, or you know, pretend that it doesn't violate. They don't know if it violates the code of conduct. We have to check our we
That's
have to
incredible.
check our books to see, does this, calling for a second Holocaust, does that violate our terms of our code of conduct? The fecklessness of these administrators and the moral depravity, frankly, it's alarming. And I can tell you that I haven't in my life spent enough time thinking about evil. It's something that always catches me off guard. I always underestimate it, and I think that's natural. I think in general people do underestimate evil. I mean, the savagery of October 7th was really quite shocking to most people. And um we're just not, you know, not all people want the same thing.
Right.
And if you're going to live next door to people who want to kill you, you're in trouble.
Well, look, I'm someone who, for all the positions that I take, I'm often surprised by the fact that I don't receive more hate than I do. But so if I do that as a comparison, then I'm feeling good. But if you have a platform the size of the one that I have and you take the positions that I do, even a small percentage of a big number ends up being a very big number. So the amount of Jew hatred that I have received since October 7, it it is unimaginable. And what's incredible about it is that it's now coming at me from all directions. So there are the Jews won't replace us folks. So these would typically be white folks who, the kind of the white nationalists and so on. So they're coming at me hard. You've got the progressive academic leftist types, right? The Jews are the colonizers and so on. And, whatever you learn in a political science or Near East department at any Ivy League university. And then, of course, you've got all the Islamic folks. So anywhere I turn, any direction I turn, it turns out that I am just the scum of the earth, right? I am a genocide supporting Zionist and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure that we can get out of it. I mean, there might be a mechanism by which their voices will suddenly become a bit less amplified, but the cat is really out of the bag, right? So the fact that after October 7th, we've seen an orgiastic increase in global Jew hatred makes me feel very pessimistic, Abigail.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm terribly optimistic. There have been some good signs. So I have to say that it really has meant so much to me to see so many good people I know who are not Jewish, standing up against the anti-Semitism. And that really needs to be said because there's so much of the anti-Semitism, but the number of people who have stuck their neck out who didn't have to, who aren't Jewish, there have been wonderful efforts, not only by personal friends of mine or prominent people. Fox News ran an anti-Semitism tracker basically tracking the regular on their site, tracking the violent incidents against Jews, because of course everyone was screaming Islamophobia every time a
Yes, of
Jew was
course.
tracked in the streets. So there have been wonderful, and people who did that weren't Jewish. The people
Right.
behind that weren't Jewish. They were not, they were, Christians and whatnot who cared. And that has really meant the world to me and to, my family and friends. But, but also there's no question that we seem to be entering a different phase of things in America, and we're going to have our civilization is going to have a choice to make. I mean, we are right now are seeing really ugly anti-Semitism online on the right. It seems to be very young and very online. I don't know how much it translates into the real world. Online, it's like a cancer. And then on the left, of course, you have the prestige anti-Semitism, that's in the halls of Congress and gets to, throw its weight around the Democratic Party whenever it feels like it. And that's obviously very, very alarming, and it's in every university.
Well,
So
speaking of prestige and universities, so my alma mater is well, one of my alma maters is Cornell, where I'll be going in 2 weeks. I'll be delivering two talks. One is on the parasitic mind and idea pathogens and so on. The other one is on Jew hatred, and there is security concerns. So, Cornell was so historically Jewish that when you would buy, Cornell regalia, Cornell University, oftentimes it would be written in a way that it almost looks, I mean, they make it look as if it's written in Hebrew because the university was so, Jewish. Well, now the Jewish alumnus from Cornell, who's returning as a professor to speak about Jew hatred at Cornell, has to make sure that there is police security. That says it all. I mean, I don't need to say anything more. That's the world we now live in.
yeah, it's a very sad and disturbing thing. I mean, these are idea pathogens, right? Because I mean, as you say in your book, like, I mean, it's so absurd on its face. Why are these people who violate the basic codes of conduct of their university, why are they not expelled? You
Right.
can't attack a speaker. You can't run and scream in their face. That's not allowed in a university, right? You can't throw things at them or make threats. And yet all these things happen across the country, and it's given, no one's ever, there are kids Jewish kids have been spat on, they've been threatened with violence, and kids and the perpetrators are almost never subjected to any form of university punishment. It's really unheard of.
Do you think that some of the lawsuits that are now, being uh, what would be the term? Enacted, not enacted, lawsuits taken. Uh, I think even at my university, in Canada, historically, you don't have quite the same litigious ethos,
Right.
right? So in the US, you step on my shoe, I sue you for $148 million. In Canada, it's not quite as much. So that the fact that now there is an organization that is suing my university because it's not protecting its Jewish faculty and students, and you're seeing it at several other universities in the United States. Do you think that that's just ultimately a band-aid solution, or is this the only mechanism by which you're going to get the attention of the administrators to do the right thing because they care about money?
Right. I think the lawsuits are incredibly important. There's no question. I think we have to fight with whatever we
Right.
can. We have to fight back. We have to fight for our civilization. But like you said, it's a mind virus. I mean, and I think anti-Semitism is a perfect example of one of these idea pathogens. I mean, what Harvard is willing to lose to cling to defending the anti-Semites is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. They're willing to lose, so much in donations and in respect and prestige. They're willing to lose the fact that I don't know Jewish students at this point, top kids who feel like they can go to that university. A university, my husband's an alum, and he would have definitely, he loved it. And there's so many great, Jewish minds who would have headed straight to Harvard. Now there's no chance. And why would you want to lose all that? And I think it's this kind of obsession with, protecting the so-called victims who are themselves the perpetrators of a lot of
Yeah,
anti-Semitism.
exactly. Well, let's since we're on a Jewish train, let's talk about some of the recent I mean, I usually don't do too much gossip on my show, but some of the stuff is too juicy. What do you think? I was going to put out a tweet today where I took a clip of Rabbi Shmuley. I was going to retweet it, and I was going to say, he's turning me into an anti-Semite. And I still might do it. I mean, of course, I mean it in a jocular way, but what's going on? What's happening there? Can you explain it to us,
I
Abigail?
think Chris Rufo, I read something he wrote in replies, which I thought was so smart. He basically said that, and I hope I'm getting this right. But basically it has to do with the economics of online, of those who live online, that there's this, among influencers, the amount of attention you can
Yeah.
get, the amount of, whatever you're selling, if you can get clicks, it is feeding attention and it's feeding extremism. There's no question. And I'm not someone who thinks, that means we need to throw off, throw every anti-Semite off Twitter, necessarily, but the economics are bad of the influencer. And I think it rewards extremism, it rewards anger, it rewards righteous fury. You know what it doesn't reward? Knowledge, sense, wisdom, actual basic command of any facts. So you have the rise of these extreme, of these influencers who are, many of whom really don't know very much, really don't care to know very much, but they have a good way with words and they're able to stoke a lot of anger in their followers. It's not a healthy system.
But I'm going to say this, but you know how only black people can say the N word and only Jewish people can say the K word and so on. So using that idiotic calculus, the when I look at Shmuley, and maybe you're not comfortable saying it, so I'll take the hit for it. He almost plays to a lot of the anti-Semitic tropes. There is a delivery about him that is truly grotesque. Look, style matters, right? Of course, I talked about this in the Parasitic Mind when I was talking about thinking versus feeling. That many people will say that noble prophet Barack Obama, peace be upon him, is so lanky and he's got a mellifluous voice and he's got a beautiful smile, so he must be great. Whereas Donald Trump is this disgusting ogre. Even though they might agree with every policy of Donald Trump, the fact that he is repulsive to them, suddenly they don't like him. I call that an aesthetic injury. Well, Rabbi Shmuley is an aesthetic injury because even if some of the content of what he was saying, if it were veridical, you would still be a bit repulsed. So, do you have any connections to him? Because I try to engage.
I don't, I don't know this. I don't know this person. From what I understand, first of all, gosh, I don't know anyone, from what I could tell, who would stand up for him at this point. I think
Yeah.
he's largely reviled.
All right, let's talk about some. I mean, you're still on the tour for this book, which only came out, I think, a month ago. I think last time that you came on, you had sort of hinted in a coy manner about your next book. I think it was in October 2021. So maybe it was already simmering in your head. This book, The Bad Therapy. Is there a third book that we should be expecting in a year or two that's simmering in that beautiful head of yours?
Thank you. I don't know yet. I seem to write a lot about this generation, so we'll see if I return to it for the next book. But I'll definitely let you know, and I'd love to come back.
Okay, well, it's so good to have you. Please stay on the line so that we could say officially goodbye offline.
Okay.
Come
Will
back
do.
anytime you like, and
Thank you.
congratulations on the success of this book.
Thank you.
Cheers.